Welcome to User Training for the Cloud DPE Development Studio. This is Gene D'Angelo. For these training sessions, I am working on a client PC located in Southeast Florida, and I am signed on to a small server located in Plano, Texas. This is the second of three parts. It continues the review of seed fundamentals and joins. I'm going to go ahead and show you a little bit about joins now, just for the heck of it, because it's convenient. But let's say that what I really wanted to do was to add these columns in fact, let me open up that table again. And here's how you find, if you go to the temp reference, and I want to look for test seed 1, here it is right here. I can simply double click it, and it brings up test seed 1. Now let's say that what I really wanted to do was for each of these rows coming from the second table, I wanted to add this information from the first table. So I wanted to add these columns to all the rows coming from the second table. To do that, all I have to do is change this to an add columns display and run it again. And now we'll have that information repeated for each one. The add columns display is set so that if there is nothing in the first column that matches it, the first table that matches the second table, the information in the second table will still go out. The fact is, in this case, we don't have that problem because these two tables are set up with referential integrity. So for every NPI in the second table, there is an NPI in the first table. But now you see that this information, these columns have been added to the columns in the second table. And that's the add columns join. Now, just to show you the what would happen, let's go back and let's put another filter on here. In this case, let's say that the provider state begins with, and by the way, we could easily have just chosen that from here, instead of typing it, say begins, and begins A. So all states begin with A only. And now if we run that process, we'll see that many of the columns of the rows will not have the information from the physician reference added to it because we dropped it out, but the information from the second table will still flow through. So here we have this information from the second table, and we have excluded the information for that ID number coming from the first table. And if maybe finding one with an A might be more difficult than I anticipated. If we go down, there is one right there coming from Arizona. As you can see, it did pick up the columns for that particular provider who was in Arizona. Now, the other alternative, we could say, let's say we only wanted, so we want to, let's say we want to extract from the second table only those providers that have are from states beginning with A in the first table. And all we have to do there is go back up here and change this to an extract rows join. So now we are using the keys from the first table to match the keys in the second table and extract those records that match, and then we're not bringing out those that are not matched. And in the shaded portion, you'll see here, if I go back to the add columns, you'll see this says unmatched, and this says matched. If I put extract rows, on the unmatched box is unchecked. So now if I run this process, we'll get out a similar looking output, but in this case we're going to be missing all of the providers that do not live in, do not practice in states starting with an A. So we've extracted the rows from the second table based on the input in the first table. So that's the add columns and extract rows join briefly. We'll probably get back to this at a future time. One thing you might notice, you might wonder, is why is all this shaded out? So, well, the fact is, you can make those available in what we call the unified join, and the unified join actually allows you to change the distinct and unmatched checkboxes to achieve whatever result you want. And when you go to the unified join, it actually retains the settings of the join you come from. So let's say instead of the extract rows, let's say we're in the add columns join, which you see it's like a version of the unified join. And so we have the unmatched box checked here. So then we go to the unified join and it's still checked. Whereas if we started from the extract rows where the unmatched is not checked, and now we go to the unified join, then it stays unchecked. So in that way you can start with a join, and I've used this sometime. The main way I use this is that if there are cases where I have an add columns join, where I do want the columns coming in that don't have any matches in the second table to go out also. So and that's most of the places I use the unified join. And so all I do is change the unified join, make this unmatched. Okay, and let's create some unmatched situations by let's take this filter off here, and let's go over here and put a filter on this table to say that the HCPCS code begins 8 with 8. Okay, now if we run this process, you'll see that we'll get quite a few providers that don't have any HCPCS code starting with 8. So down here, these providers, this Rashid Khalil, didn't have any HCPCS codes starting with an 8, but it still came, the name still came through. But where there were situations where there was a HCPCS code starting with 8, it added the information from the first table to the second table. But where it didn't have any information in the second table, it still brought the information for the first table. So this is a kind of an unusual join, but I found it to be useful in certain work. But that's how you can handle that situation. Okay. One thing that's a pretty good idea is to keep your process names meaningful. So if we go up here and change this to, we can put in whatever we want to here is to describe what we're doing. And let's say here we're demoing the unified join, and that's our process there. Now let's add a second process, and so we have a new process. So here we can again make whatever name we want. We'll demo second process, and now to add things to this, let's say what we want to do is we want to add the HCPCS description for each of the HCPCS coming out of this first process. So if we go over here, let's first of all bring in the HCPCS descriptions, HCPCS reference, and do not add all columns. And then to bring in the process from the table from the first process, we right click, and now there's an option that says add seed output. So if we click on that, we'll get a list of all of the tables that came out of previous processes in the seed and with the process number. And we can simply select this one. We can say add all columns, and it'll bring in that table from the first process, populate all the columns. Go back to the first table and bring in the HCPCS code from the first table and the description. Now if we bring in two fields like this, it's going to try to match them up with fields that already exist. And so if we do that, you'll see that it matched up HCPCS code here and put an asterisk there because it's coming from both tables using the same name. And down here it brought in another row, another work field, it brought in the description because it couldn't find a match already existing in the process, in the list of columns. And now I can perhaps change this. I can change the sequence. You can move these sequences around all you want. So I'm going to change this sequence to 7 so that it appears right after the HCPCS code itself. And now I want to make this a join where it's an add columns join, because we're adding the description from the first table to the second table. And this join, that's a very specific thing. In the add columns join, you're always adding columns from the first table to the second table. And in the extract rows, you're always extracting rows from the second table based on the records coming in from the rows coming in from the first table. So I'm going to sequence this that's coming in from both tables. Go up here, say add columns. Right click again and say add output. And again, I'm just going to delete that part. And now down here I can just say run this process. And so that'll run that process, and it'll output a table that now will have where the HCPCS code occurs. It will add to it the HCPCS description, as you can see is done here. Now, one thing that it did do is that because it's sequenced on this HCPCS code, all of those extra rows we brought in from the first table in the first process that didn't have any matching HCPCS code, they appear at the bottom. As you can see, they're all at the bottom here. So that's because we sequenced it on the HCPCS code. So those had blanks, and they occur at the bottom. And you'll notice these are all lab tests. That's what happens to be that in this area, HCPCS code starting with 8 in the 80,000 series are all lab tests. This is the end of part 2. We will continue our review in part 3.